I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese, Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Keith Schaefer, editor and publisher of the Oil and Gas Investments Bulletin, his website oilandgas-investments.com. Welcome to the show, Keith.
Thanks, Jim.
Can this rally in oil prices hold up over the summer?
Well, that's a great question. The bulls right now are saying that absolutely it can because of all the outages that are happening. You know, you've had Nigeria terrorism pick up dramatically, and that's not something that's going to go away in the near term. And that's over 500,000 barrels a day, and Canada's been down almost 1 million barrels a day now for 3 weeks, and that hasn't shown up in any of the pipeline statistics yet, Jim, because oil travels down to Cushing and down to the Gulf Coast from Canada at just the speed of you and I walking. Maybe a brisk walk, but still just a walk, about 3 miles an hour at the most. So, it's 3,000 miles to the Gulf Coast. That's 90 days. So that's it will take some time for that to show up in the market, and honestly, our market is just so myopic. It only looks at what's right in front of them. And so I think there is a big chance you're going to see some monstrous declines in inventories in the States starting in late June when this Canadian oil all of a sudden doesn't show up. And the market is been pretty resilient here at the $48 level. It hasn't really pulled back at all. Even today, we were down a few pennies, and then we got to flat, and now we're down just a smidgen. So to me, it's pretty interesting that we're actually holding in right here at the top, right in at the top of this rally. There really is no pullback, and I guess maybe the street's starting to price some of that in, that all these what they consider temporary production outages might be a little more long-term or regular than we think.
The International Energy Agency has also declared that it believes the glut is over.
Well, I don't pay much attention to what they say. If those people were really that smart, they'd be making a lot more money in private industry. So that it could be true. Just the fact that it was them that said it doesn't really mean anything to me one way or the other. But certainly, you would have to say that with reduced contango, the term structure of pricing in oil from month to month is getting tighter, which means a much tighter market as well. And demand is certainly doing its part, Jim. Demand is doing awesome. We're up probably 300,000 to 400,000 barrels a day demand in the U.S. this year, and that we were up the same amount last year. So that's a lot. And when you consider we've got about a 3 to 4% natural decline rate in the world, so you add, that's almost 1 million barrels a day just in the States alone in the last 2 years, and oil has had a decline of, let's say 3.5 million barrels a day a year. That's 7 million barrels a day lost in the last 2 years. So that's a big, that can go a long way to clearing the glut pretty quick. And of course, the media has just been full of India, and just seeing how much demand that they're really picking up. Peter Tertzakian in his book The End of Energy Obesity made a great point where he said, there's an inflection point for cultures that once they hit a certain level of prosperity, their energy use doesn't go up arithmetically; it goes up logarithmically. Like instead of going up every 10 barrels a day, it'll start going up 100 barrels a day. Once society hits a certain level of prosperity, and India is clearly hitting that right now.
And China apparently is in love with the SUV, and they're not cheap on oil.
Nope, You're seeing electric car sales kind of stagnate, and the SUV crowd really rocking it. Yep, for sure.
And I asked, what's the fascination with SUVs? You don't need a four-wheel drive vehicle in the city. Most people like it because they can see what's going on in the traffic ahead of them. It's not even their cargo capacity or passenger capacity. But I would imagine in India and China, especially India, where you have larger families, they need a vehicle that can hold a lot of people.
Okay. Could be. They only have the one-child policy there, but...
in China now you can...
saying. That could be right. You're right, Jim.
China, you can have 2 kids if you invest $250,000 or more in foreign real estate. Another reason to buy real estate in San Francisco and Vancouver.
Yes.
If you want extra children.
Our housing prices here in Vancouver have been quite a beneficiary of all that, yes.
Yeah, so official policy plays a role in it. But in India, they've never restricted the number of kids because your children are your social insurance.
There's truth in that.
And don't forget too, India every year graduates something like 20 million university graduates every year. That's a lot of brain power that'll be seeking jobs and getting probably, at least in Indian standards, decent pay.
Yep.
So all those things are going to play into the demand for oil. And really, I think electric vehicles only make up something like 1% of vehicle sales right now. So they're
That's right. It's pretty small.
Very, very small. We'll have more with Keith Schaefer right after the break.
I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese, Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Keith Schaefer. Keith, the Canadian National Energy Board has just given conditional approval to the Trans Mountain Pipeline that would take crude oil from Edmonton to Burnaby, which is next door to Vancouver. Its capacity would be 900,000 barrels a day. What kind of an impact would that have if that project went through?
Well, it would bring more Western Canadian oil to Tidewater and get world prices. So that's not as big a deal as it used to be, Jim. The WTI price and the Brent price are now actually quite close. Literally, as I even just click on my Google right now, they're only about 90 cents difference, 80 cents difference. So, but certainly in years past, when there's been a massive difference, that would have made a lot of difference, a lot of money for Canada. I know the ex-CIBC analyst, Jeff somebody, he said it was going to be $30 to $50 million a day. And, we didn't get to enjoy that, or all the taxes that would be resulting from that. But now, Jim, that it's pretty close. From a dollar point of view, it's not such a big deal anymore. But what is important, Jim, is that, these oil sands productions, a lot of decisions were made on them increasing production 2-3 years ago, and that's just starting to happen now. We're going to be increasing oil sands production in Canada no matter what for the next 4 or 5 years. So we're actually going to become pipeline constrained again by as early as late next year or early 2018. So this is really going to hopefully loosen that bottleneck, allow multiple buyers of Canadian crude, not just the Americans, who, you think about how we're having to sell oil at a discount from the West down into the States, into the Gulf Coast, and then Canada has actually become a large importer of U.S. crude on the East Coast, where we're paying full price. So, we're kind of setting ourselves up to get screwed when we do that. And a simple way around that is just to get a lot more Canadian crude to the West Coast, get it to Tidewater, where we'll get full world rates, and anybody can buy it, not just the Americans. But, Jim, the problem here is, again, the industry is shooting itself in the foot. Trans Mountain, or the Trans Mountain Pipeline, the Kinder Morgan thing, they really haven't said how they're going to deal with any spills, deal with marine spills. They haven't outlined any particular plan on what they'd do if the tank farm in Burnaby Mountain got caught fire. And, of course, that would be just a horrific personal, social, environmental catastrophe. And society has changed, Jim. We want to know that. We want the comfort. We're not going to just trust you anymore. We want to know, what are you going to do when that happens? And they haven't really said that. I suspect that's because they don't have a clue. That's such a big fire, there'd be nothing you could do. But they don't want to say that publicly. But the point is that the industry really, to this day, this far along in the war of oil consultation, still is not getting ahead of the game and being proactive to get their social license. They're always reacting instead of proacting, and that's just disappointing.
I think on the natural gas side, they were very careful to make sure that the Aboriginal populations along that proposed route were on side. What has Kinder Morgan done to make sure that people are happy with the oil pipeline?
Okay, well, we have to back up a little bit on that,
Yep.
simply because the First Nations have always said gas is good, oil is bad. So it's not like gas did any kind of big, consultation and got approval. The First Nations were much more predisposed to allowing natural gas pipelines through their lands, because obviously when you have a problem with natural gas, it just dissipates into the air. But oil just stays around for a long time. So that's not quite the way I'd phrase it, maybe, but certainly, again, the question is, what do the oil guys have to do to get their social license? And I only hear things third hand, Jim. I don't really go to any of these meetings myself to kind of hear what's going on, but certainly I'd say that the industry dug themselves a pretty big hole in the last 10 years, particularly in the early days, thinking that this was just going to get passed and built as all the other situations did. Just like again, I always come back to the example of Kitimat. Just think of Kitimat. To get that big aluminum smelter there in the middle of nowhere, they had to put 2 massive holes through the mountains. They disrupted the pristine wilderness for 10 years building that thing. You could never build Kitimat again. Kitimat could never, ever in a million years happen in Canada again. But I think what happened was a lot of the big companies that were trying to put these massive infrastructure projects through in Canada just thought, oh, well, look, that happened in the 50s. We can do that now. Like, it's just... Well, you really put them behind the 8 ball, Jim, and they've been struggling to get out from behind it ever since. And I don't know what they're really going to have to do to turn it around.
Well, I know the oil tankers on the West Coast are double-hulled, and there's never been a major accident involving a double-hulled tanker. But these people who are opposed to this said, well, there's always a first time, and if it's 1 million barrels of oil let go at once, I don't know how much one of those super tankers carries, but they do carry an awful lot.
Mm-hmm. So, you've got quite a large contingent of the anti-pipeline crowd as being quite ideological, and they don't have any interest in compromise. They just want to substitute their own tyranny for the tyranny that they see coming from the corporate side. So that's our problem. Everyone just wants their own form of tyranny. They don't want consultation and compromise and the greater good. They have zero interest in that.
The National Energy Report, which is 533 pages, a little light reading for the weekend. But they said nationally it would be great for the economy of Alberta, locally a few jobs. And it's the locals who really are opposed to it.
It's true that once the pipeline is built, there's not a lot of long-term employment. That's a very front-end loaded job situation for sure.
But we're told there are talks between BC and Alberta to do kind of an energy swap. BC is building a $9 billion dam on the Peace River, the Site C, and they want Alberta to take that power as they shut down their coal-powered power plants. And in exchange, BC will allow Alberta oil to flow to the West Coast so it can be sold to China.
You'd kind of like to think that people would rise above that kind of tit-for-tat thing, but if that's what it takes to get it done, Jim, then have at her.
Well, I know Christy Clark was not best of friends with the former Premier of Alberta, perhaps a little better with Rachel Notley, who, although she's NDP, she knows Alberta lives and dies by the oil patch.
Mm-hmm.
So she's probably a lot more willing to be, in a person, especially to see the downturn of the business already, to make sure that the industry stays healthy.
Yes. Yes, it certainly would be good to see that happen. So, like I say, I'd like to think people are a little more altruistic, but the reality is that let's just get it done. Let's just allow business to flow and prosperity to keep moving.
And I'd also think that with modern technology, which improves tremendously every single day, that they could do a much better job of monitoring oil flow. But Kinder Morgan, again, didn't do themselves any favors when there was a spill on the XL pipeline, which is brand new in South Dakota.
Yes, I'm unaware of that one, Jim, but certainly you'd like to think that all these companies would have their act together for both prevention of leaks and incredible spill response times.
Why don't they just... I mean, little simple things. What's wrong with building a big trench around it? Like the dikes that they build around all the big oil tanks that you see here on the West Coast. How come they can't do that?
Indeed. Very good point.
Yeah, that's very simple technology, a hunk of earth. We seem to have a lot of that. Keith, also, there's also talk of a BC referendum on the pipeline, and that can happen if you get 10% of voters in each riding. They thought when they put this legislation together, it would be impossible to enact it, but they did defeat the HST in BC through a referendum, and people also in the Lower Mainland in a referendum voted down the idea of paying an extra 0.5% in sales tax to pay for transit. So when voters, put their mind together, they can be a powerful force. But would all of BC be against a pipeline? I know they are in the greater Vancouver area, but even if you get on the other side of the Surrey River in Vancouver, people are more concerned about jobs and economic outlook than they are in their own personal backyard. Once you get away from the actual coast, is there less resistance to a pipeline?
Oh, absolutely, Jim. You just can't believe. People who live in the city honestly cannot believe how rural British Columbia is a different world. The farther north you go, the worse economically it gets. The oil sands has soaked up all excess labor in Western Canada. So particularly for rural Western Canada, people just don't understand what a big revenue generator that was. The spin-offs from that were unbelievable. Really, it kept social peace and kept poverty away from the door for many towns, families. Even now, with things starting to come back a little bit in the oil patch and the prospects of potentially an LNG decision being made in late this year up in Kitimat, Prince Rupert, men are ecstatic to get jobs right now. Like it's. I talked to one CEO, I had lunch with him on Thursday, and he basically said, they've had guys, grown men, literally cry on the phone saying thank you for this job, like because they've been hiring recently, and it's like it's ugly up there, Jim. It really is tough, and a lot of people down here who've never been unemployed and never had to forego their latte can hardly imagine what people go through emotionally when you're out of work for a long time.
And something I find so ironic when people show up at these anti-pipeline protests, I've asked them, how did you get here? Well, I drove my car. Well, what powers your car? Gasoline. Where did that gasoline come from? Probably Alberta. I noticed you're wearing rubber-soled shoes. Where do you think that rubber came from? Well, from some rubber plant. No, it's made out of petroleum. Everything that you have in your home, I'm just looking at my office, everything's made out of plastic. Everything. What's that plastic made out of? People don't think about their everyday lives being affected by the oil patch, but they are. And I think, but they have to do a much better job than just showing some guy canoeing saying, well, I care about the environment. Well,
yes. Or lipstick on a beautiful woman under a white hat.
Right. The lipstick came from a local petroleum plant. Keith, what's your final thought here on the pipeline? Do you think it's going to be a go?
I think Trans Mountain is going to get built, but I still think that Kinder Morgan's probably going to have to figure out a slightly different way of bringing it through the Lower Mainland here, because they want to do a different route, and that's just bringing in a lot of opposition. So it's really incumbent on them to try and do a little bit better for the world here and be a little more transparent. And we could really be stalled until we see that.
Because if things do get approved, this thing could be up and flowing by 2019. And China's oil use, as you said, is still, even with a slow economy, people there are not going to give up their cars. And by 2021, their oil use apparently is going to be up by 1/3 from what it is right now.
Knock on wood, Jim.
Keith, thank you very much for chatting with us.
God bless. Talk in a couple of weeks.
My guest has been Keith Schaefer, editor and publisher of the Oil and Gas Investments Bulletin, his website, oilandgas-investments.com. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Check out our YouTube channel, Talk Digital Network. Comments or questions for the show can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.